Hey everyone, welcome to today's Take Heart. Hope you're doing okay. I'm going to start a new little mini series today. When we were little, somewhere along the line, lots of us picked up the idea that we could either speak the truth to somebody or we could be kind to them, but we couldn't do both. It may be when Grandma turned up and brought us some Brussels sprout stew or something like that when we were 5 years old, and she came over to us and said, "Do you like my stew?" And we responded, like any 5-year-old would, honestly. And we said, "No, it tastes like vomit in my mouth." And then Grandma ran off into the kitchen and we heard her wailing and slamming cupboard doors and smashing pans around. And at that point it dawned on us, even though we were 5, maybe I have a choice between candor, being honest, and kindness. And perhaps I can't do both. And so what we can do as a consequence is we can separate caring for somebody from confronting them. We can think to ourselves, I'm either the flatmate who really loves the person I'm living with, or I'm the flatmate that tells them they're an absolute nightmare to live with, as has become clear in the last few months. I'm either the parent who they like, or I'm the parent who calls them on things, but I can't be both. I'm either the colleague who's always supportive and encouraging no matter what, or I'm the colleague who tells it how it is and doesn't care what anybody thinks. We divide those two, caring and confronting. And actually, if we want to learn to do relationships the Jesus way, if we want to have healthy and robust friendships, healthy and robust marriages, healthy and robust relationships with our colleagues at work, you name it, learning how to have conversations where there's a difference of opinion, there's high emotion, and it feels like the stakes are high. Learning to have those type of conversation really well is so important. And I'm sure you've been finding, as I think every person has, during the last few months, that there has been tension in relationships. And so the need to learn this skill is probably more obvious than it's ever been. Over the next few Take Hearts, I want to give a little recipe, as it were, for how to have these chats, bearing in mind that lots of them happen on the fly, and so I know there's limitations to that. But today I just want to look at the first step when having a difficult conversation with somebody. It's this: start with the heart. And this is a principle from, I think, Matthew chapter 12, verse 34, where Jesus says this: "You brood of vipers." Speaking of confrontation, you brood of vipers, how can you who are evil say anything good? For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. The mouth speaks what the heart is full of. Now, when thinking about how to have a difficult conversation, I usually tend to think about the words. How can I raise this with this person? What might they say in response? And I'm often, if I'm really honest, thinking about how can I win? How can I win this argument? And Jesus, it's not that our words are unimportant. We'll come on to that as we go. But Jesus says the place to start is not with the words, it's with your heart. Because your words flow from your heart. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. There's a direct road there. And when you stop and think about that, it does actually make sense. So I don't know if you've ever had a conversation where you've gone into it with exactly what I just said as a heart attitude. I want to win. I want to win this argument. I want to beat this person. Or we've gone in with the intention because we've been hurt and we're wounded, or we're feeling bitter or resentful. I want to humiliate them, or I want to punish them, or I want to help them to see that I know so much more than they do and they should have listened to me. But if that's our heart attitude, when we go into the conversation towards the other person, it will inevitably probably go downhill from there. But if we can be in a conversation with somebody, and there's a real art to this, but if we can be in a conversation with somebody where we're able to be honest, and they're being honest with us, and we might even be disagreeing quite strongly with each other, but we are genuinely for the other person, we genuinely care about them, we love them, then what that will do, if that's where our heart is, that will affect the words that we speak. It won't mean that we don't say things that aren't it won't mean that we don't say what we need to say, but it will affect the way that we say it. And so the place to begin in any difficult kind of conversation is inside, is with the heart. I remember hearing this story about this guy who was camping, and there was a stream that ran through the camp that everyone was drinking from, and everybody got really sick from this stream, and they decided that they would hike back up the stream to the source of the stream and find out what was happening. When they got close to the source, they realized that there had been an animal that had died in the stream. So all of the water that flowed down to where the camp was flowing through the dead body of the animal, and obviously it was, making the water very ungood to drink, unhealthy. And in a way, that's actually quite a helpful image for thinking about what we're going to be speaking. Before we get to what we say, hike back up the stream to the heart. Two things that can be helpful. It's easy to say, let's start with the heart. Let's get our hearts right towards the person. Really hard to actually do that. Two things that help. One is do the hike with the Holy Spirit. What I mean by that is if we do have to have a challenging conversation with someone, sit with the Holy Spirit first and say, would you do some heart surgery on me? It may be that we're feeling bitter. It may be that we're feeling resentful because we've been hurt. It may be that's not what's going on, but we're really concerned and worried. And we need to, maybe just challenge somebody on something, but ask the Holy Spirit just to show us what is going on in our hearts. It may be we're really afraid because we don't want to upset the person. We don't want to be out of control. Ask the Holy Spirit to help us see what's going on in our hearts and to make sure that our heart is for the other person. That's the first thing we can do. Second thing that we can do is really practical, which is if we know we're feeling that there's a tendency maybe in our hearts to want to punish the person or to want to really have a go at them so they get very upset. And we probably all find that sometimes. Sometimes I find myself making self-righteous, angry speeches just by myself in a room because I wish I'd said this in an argument or whatever. That's a little warning sign for me that I'm not ready to have the chat. And so what we can do that helps is we can actually process that in a healthy way with somebody who's removed from it. David Pitchers, who is the vicar of St Andrew's Chorley Wood, out of which Soul Survivor Watford was planted, he, like any person in a position of leadership in any area, used to get complaint letters back in the day. And the way that he would try and deal with those in a really healthy way was he would write a response to the letter, a first draft, and in the first draft he would put everything that he really wanted to say to them. All those things you think, yeah, well, you're not so good, and blah, 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 and have you thought about this, and let me tell you some stuff. He would just put it all in there, everything he really, really wanted to say. And then he would get his wife, Mary, to come and sit, and he would read the letter aloud to Mary. And then after he'd done that, he would screw it up, and he would throw it in the bin. And I think that was his way of processing what was going on in his heart, to bring him, as it were, to a place of peace and being for the other person as much as he could be. And then he would write a letter that probably will be more fruitful in terms of bringing that to reconciliation. And be warned, if you do that on an email, it is quite easy to press send instead of delete. But actually just that as a really practical way of processing what's going on inside of us. That where we want to get to, and I think if we can get to this place, the other stuff is a bit easier to learn. But if we can get to this place, we're much more likely to have difficult conversations well. The goal is, how can I get my heart to a point where I'm genuinely for you? Ask the Holy Spirit to help. Process in a really practical way. And that's a great first step towards learning to have difficult conversations well.